You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. I've noticed that the White Sox over the last couple of years have really shaped the way that I view baseball players as a whole. How I view teams that are building, how I view my fantasy baseball ed. Like everybody was laughing this week in our league because I dropped Josh Hader in a dynasty
Which you should,
league.
because he's not good this year.
Right, but everybody was like, oh, Chris is ruthless. And I'm like, yeah, I am ruthless. They're relief pitchers. They're hot, they're cold. That's why you don't spend a ton of money on relief pitchers and bullpen like Rick Hahn did for all those years when he wasted everything that this team had instead of addressing issues that were glaring with the money that he had. Relief pitchers are a dime a dozen.
Well, they really are.
I have no loyalty to them. When they're pitching well, great. When they're not pitching well, there's a guy in AAA or AA that can come up and do their job. There's a new guy that can be a closer 9 times out of 10. There's only 3 or 4 guys in baseball that I would say right now are the kind of closers that you would stick with if they were going through rough times a little bit longer, because the rest of them could just be moved in and out. If you look at some of the best back-end rotation guys so far this year, a lot of them are names where you're like, who's this guy? Have you seen this Finnegan guy that's out closing games for the Nationals? There's a terrible team. He's 31 or 32 years old, and he's having a spectacular first couple of months. You ride that wave until he falls off it, and then you go get somebody else's wave. That's how I look at relief pitchers.
You know, getting into fantasy in our fantasy baseball league, my top relief pitcher is Robert Suarez. Who?
Right.
He's the guy from the Padres that they were like, nah, he's good enough because Josh Hader moved on. And, you know, there's always a guy, right? Anytime you get somebody who is a premium closer, yeah, you hold on to him. But the reality is that there's always somebody up there that can come up behind and find a way to do the job. And closers get made out of starters. I mean, Liam Hendricks was a garbage starter for a few years there. And then they moved him into the bullpen, and then eventually he became one of the top closers in the game. That's the Liam Hendricks story. That's the Dennis Eckersley story. That's the story of pretty much everybody.
Think of how fickle it is, and you know.
Oh, I mean, totally.
Right. I mean, and you see people do stupid things, and trust me, Rick Hahn isn't the only stupid one. I think I brought up the Bucks in the Basement podcast out of Pittsburgh on the last show or the show before that. One of the big things they're yelling about is, why did you give Aroldis Chapman $10 million when you have the lowest payroll in baseball? Like, what, you already had a closer, so you picked up a $10 million a year setup man when you're coming out of your rebuild. I mean, that Ben Cherington is so Rick Hahn right now out there. It's not even funny. It's not something that's exclusive to the White Sox, although sometimes I think it feels that way. Another thing that I'm definitely sure about when it comes to my feelings on baseball players is that I have no loyalty to veterans. And trust me, I have loyalty to a lot of things. I have loyalty I'll show this weekend when I go down the ballpark. I'll be at Cork and Carry at the park at 33rd and Princeton. Why? Because I know they got good food. I know it's a good price. I like drinking at the bar. I like sitting outside. It's got a great atmosphere, great people working there. I can bring the whole family before the game. Afterwards, win or lose, it's a party there. I know what they are, and they've proved to me time and time again they're a great value and an excellent way to start and end your experience, even if the team is bad. Good or bad. If the White Sox are good or bad, Cork and Carry at the park at corkandcarry.com, 33rd and Princeton is the place to be. I'm loyal to them. I am not, though, loyal to veteran players. Now, I know I never played the game. I played the game in Little League, but I never really played the game. And a lot of people are like, oh, this guy earned their position. But I don't understand. As we're sitting here today and we're recording this show, Martin Maldonado started 2 straight games at catcher. I don't get it. I don't get how a guy who's hitting .095 has the exact same amount of plate appearances and games, basically, of the guy who's the young, up-and-coming, really good catcher, one of our best hitters on our team, surprisingly, in Corey Lee. If you just compare them right now as we talk, Maldonado's got 69 plate appearances to Lee's 70. Maldonado's got 23 games he's appeared in to Lee's 25. Maldonado's hitting .095 while Lee's hitting .273. Maldonado's got a .320 OPS, a -8 OPS plus, compared to Corey Lee, who's got a 769 OPS, and his 116 OPS plus means he's above the league average and is a positive impact player. And the 25-year-old is splitting time essentially right now. And it makes absolutely zero sense to me. Just no sense whatsoever. It just continues to show why Pedro Grifol not only should not be the manager of this team, but he's an idiot. I know that that's a harsh word, like I'm name calling right now.
It is a little playgroundish.
But I can't come up with another opinion for a guy like that. I can't come up with another word for him except idiot. When I see the comparison, and somebody else pointed out on Twitter, and I just saw it when I was scrolling, but I'm using it. Paul DeJong over the last 14 games. I'm going to bring up his splits as we're sitting here right now because I haven't even looked at it, but I saw this thing when I was scrolling through. Here we go. I'm bringing it up right now. Last 7 days, 308 batting average, 949 OPS, 2 home runs. Last 14 days, 279 with a 784 OPS. He had those 2 home runs in the last 14 days because he actually hit him in the last 7. But again, here's a guy who's hot right now. And hitting the ball, his B-WAR is actually a positive B-WAR. He's contributing. It's more than what I expected from Paul DeJong, honestly. I did not expect this from him. In fact, Nicky Lopez, be nervous because if Colson Montgomery gets here and Brian Ramos is playing third base, I don't think you're the second baseman anymore because Paul DeJong should be standing over there on a regular basis. Meanwhile, Paul DeJong, in the last couple of weeks, really in recent memory, maybe at the very beginning of the season, this isn't true, but in the last several weeks has not batted above 6th, I think, in the White Sox lineup.
I don't think he's ever batted that high in the lineup.
He may have batted 2nd at some point, but the thing I'm trying to get to here is why is Andrew Vaughn batting 2nd or 3rd or 4th on a consistent basis, hitting 194? Over the last 7 games, hitting 200. It ain't getting better. He isn't even on a hot streak coming out of it. Like the White Sox media account put out, look at Andrew Vaughn get us on the board the other night. Show all the rest of it. It's terrible. Why is he hitting high? And that again goes back to my statement. I don't care how harsh it is. Pedro Grifol is an idiot.
Look, there's a couple of things to unwrap there. Okay, one, the slavish devotion to veteran players sometimes. I do think managers get in trouble with that, and I don't think it's just Pedro, but you do have a situation where it's weird because why is Martin Maldonado getting so much more of the benefit of the doubt than Paul DeJong? Okay. Both of them are, I mean, in some ways, Maldonado is exactly what we thought he was going to be, right? Except worse.
Well, he can't play defense. Like I was told, he might not be able to hit, but he's going to play great defense and he's going to run the staff perfectly. I don't see him doing anything better than Corey Lee in any facet of the game.
No. And that's the thing is that by comparison, Corey Lee is every bit as good, if not better than Martin Maldonado objectively in every facet. But I'm not talking about Corey Lee for the moment here. But you know, Maldonado is not hitting, and he's never going to hit, and we knew that coming in. He was going to be here based on his ability to be a receiver, and whatever he's got left in the tank there, he's showing us. Paul DeJong is also kind of what we thought he was going to be. Given a chance to play most every day, Paul DeJong is proving himself to be a guy who's incredibly streaky, strikes out way more than he ought to. I mean, he's got 39 Ks and 103 at-bats, according to what I'm looking here, or 103 plate appearances, rather. And that's way too high because that's, like a third of the time he's striking out. And that might explain why he's not hitting higher. But on this team where it's not all things are equal, okay, Andrew Vaughn is also not a guy who is getting on base. He's also striking out way too much. He is not contributing anything. Paul DeJong is at least your top home run hitter on the team. And also, all of these veterans, we talked about this in the last show, all of these veterans are guys that you can move on from. I actually talked about Paul DeJong being a guy that if he starts to falter and by the end of the year he is not contributing, if he gets DFA'd, no one's going to be worried about that because he is a guy that we expected to move on from. And you need guys like that. We have been so attuned as White Sox fans to be worried that when a guy comes here, he's got to be here and he's got to be the guy, right? No, Paul DeJong might only spend one season as a Chicago White Sox player, might even not spend a complete season because he is one shortstop injury away from being the next Robbie Grossman and being out the door even before the deadline. And yeah, and now you can throw in how fungible are your relief pitchers, because I'm sure at some point we'll see Anthony Huopi Tuioni Toa.
I love that name. We're going to have to practice it.
Yeah.
Sox in the Basement listeners, for exterior windows, doors, patio doors, and storm doors, look no further than Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. No high-pressure sales. You go see them. They don't come in and track mud into your house. The dog's tracking mud into my house right now with all the rain. You don't want some stranger doing it, bringing in some dirty, broken window that doesn't look anything like what they're going to actually put inside of your home. Instead, go see everything full living color with all the bells and whistles available for you to see in their big, beautiful showroom out at 159th and Ridgeland, actually a half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. The owners in the showroom and on site, they use their own installers. They don't farm out the work. They've been doing it that way for 4 decades in Oak Forest since 1985. All major brands, custom made, no stock items for a perfect fit. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. The guy that the White Sox got
For
Robbie Grossman has a ridiculous last name that I'm going to butcher all the time, but I think that is a great move. That's a guy who actually has potential to be a nice piece in your bullpen, isn't going to cost you a lot of money, and you got rid of a guy that you really never invested anything into and that was never going to be a part of your plans. I mean, heck, he could have been DFA'd in 2 weeks if everything went better for you with some of these other players that are around him.
And it wouldn't matter. But for right now, Paul DeJong, invest in some offense. Tommy Pham, play him because he's hot. Use these guys. If you're smart, if Pedro is being smart about it and he's worried about his job, he's riding only the hot hands.
Well, the problem is he's not worried about his job. And
that's the problem.
And that's the massive problem. Like, look, I call Pedro an idiot on this podcast. Trust me, Ozzie Guillen wants to call Pedro an idiot when he's on television. When Ozzie Guillen is yelling about the accountability the other day and how upset he is about it, he's calling Pedro an idiot too. He just isn't going to use that exact word. Maybe because they're both in the same managers club, because it's all part of a fraternity. Maybe it's because he's on state media, right? And it's owned by the team. But he's essentially saying this manager who continues to trot these guys out, this manager who continues to put Martin Maldonado in the lineup, this manager who continues to force feed Andrew Vaughn as a top of the order hitter that should be playing first base every day when he's never done anything in the first 1,500 at-bats before this season began to even suggest that was a viable thing. It was just hope, like maybe he could take another step, and guess what? He hasn't. What Ozzie's saying is he's saying Pedro's an idiot. In fact, I'll be honest with you. If I'm Ozzie Guillen, I would love to just hear the Guillen family have a conversation, right? Like, I would love to hear the boys talk with dad. Because I've always said that I have a very close relationship with my father. My boys are close with me. I'm very fortunate with that. When Ozzie used to kiss his sons on the lips after big wins in the dugout, some people would make fun of it. That's how we are in my family. We're very, very close family. And my dad and I have always been very honest about each other when we have conversations. We talk about his work when I was younger and everything like that. I guarantee the Guillen boys, when they're on the phone with dad or if they're around the house at Sunday dinner, the amount of times they talk about what Ozzie would do if he were running this team right now. I would just love to hear an honest conversation of like around the table where he's like, that guy would never play again. I would throw that guy right out of the dugout. This is how I would run things. And I'm sorry, I know that it's a meatball thing to say, but he is the best manager in my lifetime that managed the White Sox. He's the only manager that took a team that wasn't good enough. I'm sorry, they weren't. You looked at them on paper when the season started in 05, and then you look at what happened to them after 05. When the Lightning got into the bottle, he knew how to massage them through a season. He got them through that terrible month where they couldn't win a game and was able to balance accountability and not giving up on the guys that he knew he needed to go out there and win. He made smart decisions throughout the playoffs. He went on an incredible 11-1 record. He may have made mistakes later on. There may have been tension. He's the best White Sox manager I've ever seen, and he's sitting in a booth being wasted while this idiot puts terrible lineups up there and makes horrible decisions. For all the bad blood right now, the fact that he was treated terribly in the interview process and they picked Pedro over Ozzie, and you could tell that really bothered him. You could see he's actually said it out loud in a lot of ways if you're really listening to how upsetting that was to him. With all of it there, you would just love for somebody to finally say, you know what, Ozzie, can you just move into the dugout for the rest of the year? Because I would love to see it. I would love to see it. Think of how much fun it would be better at the ballpark if a World Series champion manager whose number should be retired by the team for that accomplishment and his years that he played on the field. It really should be. It should be on a wall up there. If Billy Martin can come back for the Yankees 27 times, Ozzie Guillen should be able to walk in a lost season like this and give us some entertainment. I'd buy more tickets. I'd pay more attention. You want to make money, Jerry Reinsdorf? The guy's sitting right there. It would be nothing but entertaining. And I'm telling you right now, you'd have accountability. Andrew Vaughn would never play first base again.
That's true.
Martin Maldonado would sit at the end of the dugout and get in on Sundays when he did the crazy Ozzie lineup, and he just throws guys out there that haven't played all week long, and you knew it was coming, right? Well, I got to play him at some point, so we're just throwing this game away. You know, and you could tell the Guillen's probably having a beer by the fourth inning because this is the throwaway game. I bet you they would win more games, be a 500 team in the second half, and we would have constant just baseball entertainment and more hope for this team if you just let him take over. And you know what? If later on you're like, this isn't the guy that we want when we move forward, fine. But right now, I just don't understand how you have a guy that's sitting there in the postgame and the pregame telling you what they should do. And then they constantly go out and prove that he's right. And you don't want him. And I don't get it. Like, I know it's meatball, but I'm sorry. Give Ozzie Guillen the White Sox for the rest of the year. Can we just move what they're paying for him? Like, Reinsdorf's actually paying him for what he's doing. If you look at how the money works and how it filters through his own media station, can't we just pay him the same amount to move over to the dugout or give him just a little bit more? I mean, you've already kind of got a sunk cost with him. Wouldn't that ease like the issue that Reinsdorf seemingly has with paying Grifol to sit on his couch? Because he isn't actually adding a lot of payroll into the manager's spot. He's just using another employee. Can we convince the old man to do it that way? Like, to me, it just seems ludicrous to me that I'm watching a guy who's the best manager that I ever saw manage my team, even with all of his flaws, because I'm not saying he doesn't have them. And I'm watching him go through the pain of knowing what he would do, knowing that he would be doing better with this team, knowing that talent would be thriving and guys would be rewarded for playing well and guys that weren't playing well would not get a free pass anymore. And that it would be far more entertaining. It hurts me to watch that he's sitting over there on TV and Pedro gets to walk out every night and just be inept and keep his job.
Well, everything you're saying about Ozzie, he proved, right? Because you go back to 2004 and, you know, he's got a guy who was legitimately a star player in Carlos Lee, but he didn't like the way he played the game. He didn't like the attitude. He held him accountable for some of the things that he didn't like about Carlos Lee and about his hustle and about his desire and all that stuff. And for a change, the organization listened and sent Carlos Lee packing, brought him back a couple of pieces.
Scott Pasetnik, Luis Vizcaíno, who was a big part of that bullpen. I mean, like, he was right. He was right. I mean, remember, Maglio Ordonez and Carlos Lee were the nucleus that was going out there. And Ozzie, after a year with these guys, was like, nah, this ain't the nucleus.
Right. And that's what you're trying to do right now, okay, is you're not even trying to build a nucleus right now. What you're trying to do with the team that you have here in front of you is you're trying to, and really honestly, if what Chris Getz is saying about the way that they want to compete year in and year out by fundamentals, defense, if we recognize the fact that Jerry's not going to spend the money, the only way this happens is if you build a roster that has some flexibility that, and by flexibility, I don't just mean guys who can play multiple positions, but I mean flexibility in terms of guys that you can just discard if they are not performing. Okay. And you have depth that you can bring in to replace the guys that are not performing and give those guys an opportunity to perform. If you have that kind of roster flexibility, you can win games, but the manager cannot be stuck on anyone. And I don't care who they are. All right. There comes a point where on a team of no stars, you just don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt. Okay. Look, if Corey Lee goes ice cold at some point and Martin Maldonado is playing better behind the plate and Martin Maldonado is doing okay at the plate, or at least by comparison to Corey Lee, and you want to give him a few more starts and give the kid a mental break, That makes sense. That's baseball. That happens. People go hot and cold. Happens all the time. But if Corey Lee is outperforming him in every way, shape, and form, then Corey Lee should be getting the majority of the starts because it's better for the team. You win more ball games that way. And I kind of said it a few minutes ago, but I'll say it again. Just let this thing sink in. If Pedro knows that he's not going anywhere because Jerry Reinsdorf's not going to fire him, then he's not worried about managing for his job. In a year where the White Sox were not expected to win anything, are not going to win anything, and it become a punchline across baseball about how futile their winning efforts have been, okay, to the point where other broadcasters around the league are now starting to say something like, we really need to face the White Sox to get our team back on track because it's like sending everybody down to AAA.
Yeah, we fix what ails other teams. That's what
this is what the White Sox are, yeah. So if you're Pedro Grifol and you're not worried about winning games, you're not worried about losing your job, then all you're doing is just put your friends out on the field. You're just making nice with guys that you want to make nice with.
And that's not how it should be. Sox fans, here's the deal. When you combine State Farm home and auto insurance, you save an average of $889. State Farm agent John Harrell is ready to help you combine home and auto and save in Chicagoland. Call him today. 708-481-4500. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Average annual per household savings based upon a 2019 national survey by State Farm of new policyholders who reported savings by switching to State Farm. You have a good point there. I interrupted you.
Pedro seems to have a problem with young players.
He really does seem to have a problem with young players. I mean, Oscar Colas is never getting another shot up here until Pedro's gone. That's just the feeling you have after watching the way that he's treated him. But then the extreme loyalty to some of these other guys. I mean, he's constantly doing that thing like, well, you know, they have a track. He keeps saying the track record thing.
Oh, and none of these guys have a track record.
What is the track record? Nobody has. What track record are you talking about? If they have a track record, it's a track record of mediocrity to bad. Your whole team is a track record of mediocrity to bad, or a track record of a lot of injuries, or a track record of bad defense, or a track record of being a first baseman that you keep sending out to right field that really isn't a right fielder and probably should be standing at first base. I mean, those are the track records. I don't know what he's looking at. And again, you had a guy sitting there. I mean, I think that's really the thing that always that makes me chuckle. Whatever's happening behind the scenes, whoever hates Ozzie Guillen in that organization, because somebody's got to hate him. Somebody just we cannot let this guy in here.
Well, and we thought
because he's going to expose how bad I am at my job. That's what it is. He's going to expose how bad I am at my job when he walks in and changes things. Because we've got a team that said that they brought in Chris Getz because he could turn around quick because he didn't need to learn any of the players. And then you got a guy who won a World Series for you, who's around the team constantly and analyzes them on TV that you blew off in the interview process. And then you watch nightly point out why the guy you hired is an idiot. And everything he says is right. And you don't want anything to do with him.
And that's the thing. For years, we thought it was Kenny Williams, right? We just assumed it was Kenny, that Kenny and Ozzie didn't get along, right? They clashed because Kenny was trying to put together a Kenny Williams team and not an Ozzie Guillen team, which is also something
That is true. I mean, like, I want you to get to your point, but remember this. You brought it up earlier on. Ozzie's the reason why you saw the Carlos Lee move. Ozzie's the reason why you saw the Maglia or Ordonez move. Ozzie was pushing for something and Kenny went along with him. After they won a World Series, suddenly Kenny started changing the team, and a lot of those little pieces that were part of the identity of the team were leaving. And then you saw the window that should have been open for years close very quickly because GM thought he was smarter than the manager, who really gave him the best advice and got them to that position.
Well, and look no further there than in 2006, trading away. And I love Jim Thome. Don't get me wrong.
It wasn't the right move.
It was not the right move for the White Sox.
The one I always hated was the El Duque one. I mean, when you listen to them all talk now, like when those guys get together and they talk about the influence that he had on them and the way that he made them all better pitchers and just the attitude of the entire pitching staff was built around that guy essentially. And then to trade him away for what it was that Velasquez or whatever it was, and he came in and he wasn't that good. And he would
Javi Vasquez,
yeah, and he would have like good games and bad games, but like he was a detriment. I remember that it was something that you were constantly like, this guy constantly becomes a problem for us. He's got these weird games. He has these moments where he can't get through innings. He wasn't the right fit. You had this trilogy of players in Creedy and Rowan and Przinsky who they were the reason for the don't stop believing thing, right? And then you got rid of one of them. Like it was the tinkering made no sense that offseason. I know they came close to making it to the playoffs, but the proof is in the pudding. By 2007, they're a nothing team.
Yeah. And it, and that's where that's actually, I mean, the point I was getting to anyway with where Chris Getz needs to go is that, Chris Getz could be in a position to do exactly what you need to do, which is find the right manager and then create the team around the manager's identity.
That's what you should do.
Chris Getz probably understands what an Ozzie Guillen team needs to look like. My fear is that what we're really looking at here is we're looking at Chris Getz putting together a Pedro Grifol team of veterans, of guys that have grinded, that have been around, that have a track record. Now, not a good track record, but they have the back of a baseball card that says MLB on it and not minor leagues. Okay.
This guy plays in the majors. Is he any good? This guy plays in the majors.
But he plays in the majors. Okay. And maybe that's what Chris Getz did, and this is what Pedro's able to do with it.
Well, then Chris Getz is an idiot too, because nobody should have looked at Pedro and said, this guy knows what he wants and I'm going to give it to him. Nobody should have done that with Pedro. Nobody should have listened to anything he had to say and said, oh yeah, this guy, he's got it all figured out.
No, but I honestly though, if you're a GM and if you're saddled with a manager, which we all know that that's what the case is, right? That Chris Getz gets the GM job and can't make a change. He can't make a change. So that's the best thing you can do is put together a team. And what we're watching Pedro do is sit there and say, if you are a guy whose name I recognize, Pedro Grifol might be the Kenny Williams of managers. I recognize your name. I've heard your name before.
You were really good.
I will play you.
You were really good in your prime. You're about 40 years old now, and we'd like you to come play for the White Sox so you could be a White Sox legend. And we can talk about how you once played for us. Yeah.
Yes.
Seriously, Pedro and Kenny would be perfect for each other. Right?
Oh my gosh.
That's probably how Pedro got in the building.
Him?
Pedro probably got in the building because Kenny was like, ooh, this guy's speaking my language. Like
Kenny hired him. Right? That's exactly how he got
That's
in.
how this works. And now you're stuck with him because the old man is like, well, I got to make a change, but I got to pay 2 manager salaries? That's crazy. Getsy, take my advice. Chris Getz, I'm speaking to you. Take my advice. Figure out how you can save the old man money by moving Ozzie from one thing that he's already paying for into something else he's paying for. Save yourself the trouble, my friend. All right? At least there'll be some accountability. He'll weed out for you who's good and who's bad. Brooks Boyer should be begging for it because you can't get anybody in that ballpark. It's going to be really crowded on Saturday because of the giveaway. And they might get something like this is coming out on Saturday morning. So they might have had something on Friday night because of the Harry Potter fans. But if it's not a giveaway.
No, but the Harry Potter giveaway was already done when you bought the tickets.
Right. But here's the thing. If they're not getting people in there. They're closing the upper deck on most nights. Like they're saving money on fireworks. If you really want to get people in there, you can say better at the ballpark all you want to, and you can send, and I think it's great. It's very smart. Send your people out there and engage at the tailgates that people are doing and everything else like that. But you really want to get butts in the seat. You really want people paying attention to the White Sox again. You want to get those people that forgot about this team or said, I'm not coming back until they do something to make me pay attention to them. Give Ozzie Guillen the White Sox.
And put him on every poster holding a campfire milkshake. And I'm there, baby. I'm there.
That music means the Sox Nerd joins us once again each and every week. Dave Marin, who puts all those interesting tidbits and trivia up on the scoreboard at the rate, gets on the line and talks White Sox with us, and he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore. Check out the Quarryman Challenge and the big to-doings this weekend, and visit LamontDowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for me?
Chris, let's talk uniform numbers. I had a lot of fun researching the number 44 when Brian Ramos was assigned the number upon his call-up to the White Sox a week ago. I could never remember a third baseman wearing that number for the Sox. So I went digging and discovered that it is indeed a rarity. Ramos is one of only 2 players to don 44 and appear at the hot corner for the Sox. The only other player to wear that double 4 and man third for the Sox was Swervin' Mervyn Connors for 28 games in 1937. And with any luck, Ramos will be the all-time leader in this category soon, like next month. I originally thought Chet Lemon, one of the Sox more prominent 44s, was part of this club. A stalwart outfielder, Chet did play 6 games at third base in 1975, but he wore number 2 that season, his first with the Sox before wearing 44 the rest of his career on the South Side. Yes, Chet Lemon was the last player to wear number 2 for the Sox before it was retired for Nellie Fox in 1976. These are the kind of rabbit holes I fall into. And I'm not the only one. In fact, the old nerd is a lightweight in this arena compared to some. I discovered this when I did some research on the Sox and number 50 when Lenyn Sosa first joined the team. At first, it was believed, according to the Sox media guide, that Sosa was the first position player to wear 50 for the Sox since catcher Mike Colburn in 1978. However, Baseball Almanac and BaseballReference.com did not have Colburn wearing 50. In trying to clear this up, I learned through a webmaster at Baseball Almanac that there is a dedicated colony of military sports fans who started compiling and sharing uniform number info in the 1960s. Based in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, they watched and listened to games and collected numbers from sources decades ago. The rule was, if they didn't see it or hear it, they didn't share it with each other. Anyway, Baseball Almanac had a historian who did not have Colburn wearing 50 in any of the score sheets from the games in which he played. So Colburn was number 30 and number 19. And prior to Sosa, then, the last position player to wear 50 for the Sox was Cotton Nash in 1967. This is the life I have chosen. Before I get to my zinger, I remind you, pearls like these can be found on my blog, which can be accessed at soxinthebasement.com. My zinger? Speaking of Ramos, he was the first White Sox player to make his major league debut at third base without a plate appearance since another Brian Downing, May 31st, 1974. Downing did not get an at-bat because he injured his knee on the first play of his career and missed the next 2 months. That's it, Chris. All you wanted to know about 44, 2, 50, and especially number nerds.
And all I heard there as a White Sox fan was way back in the day, there were guys who would injure themselves on the first play and be out for 2 months. That is so White Sox.
It's not new.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.